Hi, welcome to Season 4 of Product Ops Podcast with me, Jirisha Nadaraju. This season, I'm joined by a special co-host and prior Season 1 guest, Dr. Kevin Sakamoto. Each week, we'll be chatting to Product Ops practitioners, consultants, and thought leaders about how they make their value visible. Listen in for practical tips on how to drive real organizational impact with Product Ops. John, welcome to Product Ops Podcast. We are very excited to have you on for Season 4 and looking forward to chatting to you. But yeah, how are you doing?
Good. It's as we discussed before, it's another morning with a 7-year-old, so that's always fun. But yeah, I'm doing fine, having a great summer in the startup throes with my current company, which is chaos and nonstop all the time. But yeah, enjoying the summer.
Nice. Maybe that's a good segue into finding out a bit about my first question to you, which is just a lot of people know you. You are, I guess, what we would term like a product thought leader, influencer. I'm sure you don't want any
fast follower.
Yeah.
I know on second thought leader.
On second thought leader. Oh, I love that one. That's a good one. So many people know you, but it would be great maybe just to find out a bit about your journey, maybe into the product operations type space. If you could tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It did go through product management and UX research, I guess. And then what happened, I worked at a company called Amplitude where I did a lot of like product evangelism and external enablement. So enabling our customers in different ways and doing workshops and learning how a bunch of other companies work. And then that's what set me up for my stint in product ops. Internally, I would say, one funny part here is I probably worked in product ops externally in terms of writing things for people and giving guidance or sharing what I've learned, and then internally as well, not for a super long time. And so that was kind of a fun transition to do that from externally and internally. And then I've always been fascinated by, I guess, operations in general, or just the more thoughtful application of this type of thinking. I now work at a startup and our customers are in product ops. And so now I'm meeting, hundreds of product operations folks. And, it's now this is the third view I've had of it, working directly with product ops views. Yeah, so I've kind of 360-degree view of product ops in some ways. That's a bit about me and the path to that. I think I've always been fascinated by the dynamics in companies, not so much the process side of it, but more the systems and the dynamics and these ideas like how might you try to get lots of people to do something? I know that sounds kind of blunt, but in some cases you're trying to wrangle people in just to get something done. But then also questions like what's the right level of consistency in a company? How do you align on language? Like those types of things have always been fascinating to me, and I've written about them. So someone the other day said, you've been sort of an ops service designer, weird org designer at heart for these last 10 years anyway. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
That's so fascinating. And I like the different points of view and perspectives that you've had on like product ops, which it feels very unique to any of the guests that we've had on the podcast before. And what you said is so true around I think you do need to be a little bit curious or interested in how you get people to do or change their behavior and do these different types of things, right? So much of it, I think, also has to do with just like human psychology and like understanding what you need to do to actually get people to adopt the things that you put out there and work in a different way. So yeah, very, very interesting.
I love what you said about the third view of product operations, and I'm wondering how you leverage that now in your current role, because most people only have sort of this one point of view, but you articulated three. So how do you capitalize on that? How do you take advantage of that?
Sometimes it's a bit of a liability in a sense, because you're in a startup and part of it is to be naively optimistic. This is going to sound funny. So for example, in a flight of expressiveness yesterday, I wrote this long piece for our team internally. I said, here are the 10 forever problems. And these problems were things like look, it doesn't matter what tool you have, there will always be a recontextualization problem. It's not a source of truth problem, but you'll have your source of truth. The problem is that the source of truth has to be recontextualized 5 different ways. The next problem is like there's always a cognitive load problem. You can't, in adding more fields or adding more steps or adding the perfect thing is always going to be going up against the cognitive load of the people in the company. Like a company is lucky to get 1 or 2 or 3 things right every quarter from a sort of organizational flow standpoint. And so anything more than that is doing it. Or I think a fourth example was this idea of like, you can only keep so many things consistent in a company. There'll be the official way of working and then the real way of working, and then there'll be the idealized real way of working, and then there'll be the idealized future way of working. And that's a forever problem. So if you think, for example, oh, if we could just agree on how we work and write down our SOPs and do all this stuff, everything will be fine. Well, no, that's just not the case. In fact, if you did that, that would mean that the seeds of tomorrow wouldn't exist. They would go underground. So as in operations, you're always dealing with the official way that things are supposed to work, but in some ways you're sort of tacitly enabling the new subversive behavior because that becomes the new behaviors of tomorrow, but not all the subversive behavior. Anyway, it's funny because I wrote a post of 10 of these. Maybe I'll share it when I eventually publish it externally with it all sanitized and stuff. But here we are like a tool provider. And I was writing internally from a very non-naive standpoint. I'm like, look, these are forever problems that we have to work with. So in some ways, it's a little bit of a liability. But in other aspects, it's obviously a benefit because you've just, if you've been an operator, another example is I have a coworker and he'll say something, well, if that company could just align on dependencies and keep them up to date, we would be good, like, right? And I said, well, let me just tell you, that's a best laid plans thing. If you've been an operator, you've sit in front of the spreadsheet with 1,000 dependencies and someone said, why don't I put that in a tool? Wouldn't it be great if I put that in a tool? And everyone said, oh yeah, that's going to make next quarter so much easier if we put it in a tool. And then 5 days later, all the negotiations around dependencies have happened and nothing's up to date. And you're sitting there with either a spreadsheet or a tool filled with useless stuff, right? To do these things. So I had to impart the operator's skepticism. It sounds like I'm being very skeptical this morning on these things, but you do, once you've observed these dynamics and also have made all the mistakes, I've made almost all the mistakes I've written about typically. So, some people go on Lenny to talk about all the things that work at their company. I just write about all the things that haven't worked for me and that I'm still thinking about and learning about. So I don't know, that's what your question inspired for me. It's just when you see it from the different angles, it doesn't necessarily, startups are often about kind of naive optimism. So I am optimistic too, but you've seen it from different angles, basically.
I really like your realistic or pragmatic take on on what it's like, because I do think sometimes in the product type theoretical world and books and processes or things that we see, frameworks, it often just completely disregards the reality on the ground that you often have to deal with. And so I think the more realism that we can bring into how teams actually work and how we navigate this, the better, because then we're not like sugarcoating it. We're saying, hey, yes, we can all strive for this, but also you're going to experience these things too. And let's kind of accept that and then see what we can do from there. Sounds a bit like that, which is a great approach to take.
It helps you reset the optimism too for these things. And I think that's what I see for a lot of people who get into operations from different areas, especially if they come from like revenue ops or marketing ops or other things into product ops. They're just like, well, I mean, in last quarter, we lined it up. We got the consultant. We figured out the revenue categories. Now everyone's entering everything correctly in Salesforce. Why can't we do that here? It makes sense that we would do it. And then what you discover is like, no, you're dealing with a different beast here. You're dealing with like an emergent activity. I do this small workshop for product ops for some of our customers, but when we talk to them, I said, well, the words you use like epics or strategy pillars or anything that stuff, they're just labels that are trying to label something which is much more fluid and organic. The example I use is a team that spends 3 quarters delivering daily Do they have 180, so 3/4, do they have 270 initiatives? No. They've got one initiative. Are they releasing every day? Yes. Are they launching occasionally? Yes. Are they running experiments? Yes. The words are just words for these things. And if you boil that down to a spreadsheet that says team A, initiative, 3/4, and the person says, wow, that's taking a long time. You're like, no, but they're shipping every day. So these words are just labels for things. Whereas, for example, in revenue ops, if you work in a company and said, that is a stage 4 opportunity. That is even though the sales cycle can be different, it's a fairly stable flow that's built in the company that's repeated every single day. It's fussed over every single day. Everyone's incentivized around those flows. Every salesperson knows what a stage whatever opportunity is. And even then they have trouble getting everyone to update Salesforce. So even in an incredibly stable, repetitive environment, you still have problems with data quality and things like that. Now throw that into just generally more emergent product work, and you have to reset your expectations if you're coming from operations from another part of the company into that group.
The perceived reality changes depending on where you're standing and who you are. And you bring this very broad spectrum of being able to view through so many different lenses. And I'm curious to hear, one of the things that we sometimes hear is that product operations is going out of style, that organizations are letting them go. And we'd love to get your take on the current and future state of product operations and the function in general.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I mean, I've been on calls and people are like, we've had to let go of half of our team. And I think the perspective people need to keep in mind is that there's always macro cycles of kind of growth and efficiency. And now we're in this weird space where it's not just efficiency, it's efficiency and growth and whatever at the same time. So the pendulum is going back and forth, but now the pendulum is going crazy. It's like that, if you've ever seen these pictures of where they have some magnets and a pendulum, and the pendulum makes all sorts of weird movements. At first, maybe the pendulum just had 2 magnets or 3, and the pendulum was just going like this. And now it's going, there's 6 magnets and it's going like this, and then to do things. So I think you have to keep the macro cycle in mind, that this macro cycle kind of moves back and forth, and it impacts any enabling type role or any type of operational role. It doesn't matter if it's design ops. It doesn't matter if it's UX researchers. It doesn't matter and part of it too is a little sad because it's like a contagion among executives. They start these ideas and it becomes reinforced socially between them. I mean, if you think, for example, in your company that your CEO or whoever is part of a small WhatsApp group with other CEOs and other people, and they're talking and because their belief is they can't get real information from everyone. Therefore, they have to connect directly with their peers and they're going to get this relationship. Unfortunately, that creates bubbles too. So in those particular bubbles, they're talking about things like, well, I don't know, at the end of the day, I mean, we must have I guarantee 10% of our engineers have 5 jobs, we could totally downsize this by 10% and be okay. Or, you know what, all those operations people, they are just smoothing over deficiencies in our managers. If we just had better managers, we wouldn't need those operations people to do those things. So the reality at the moment is that in these closed rooms, in this echo chamber, these types of ideas kind of permeate and build up. And then, so that's the cycle we're in at the moment, which is, I hate to say it's like vibe leadership. There's vibe programming, but there's vibe leadership. And that's what's going on at the moment, like speed running leadership as you were sitting there in front of Cursor, right? So the net effect is that we're in this kind of vibe landscape that puts operations at a bit of a disadvantage, and the vibes around efficiency and leaders getting into all the details and low process and low bureaucracy, all these things kind of align themselves against operations. In this particular moment, it's 2005. Hopefully people will listen to this in 2 years and it'll change. It's July 16th and things won't happen. So that's my thought at the moment, that we're in this sort of vibe leadership mode, and it's very easy to diminish certain roles. And this happens in a bit of an echo chamber that's happening. One thing I would say though, is that there might be a silver lining in all this, because a lot of teams grew very rapidly, like product operations teams, and the sort of ratios of when you would hire product ops people got out of whack. So it was just like the organizations were growing too broad anyway. They didn't really need to go multi-product and hire a product operations person for each product. They weren't even really products anyway. They were just packaging and other things that they were selling. And so the unfortunate thing is that maybe through this downsizing, yeah, obviously a lot of people are looking for work, and it's like this vibe situation at the moment. But I do think it creates the seeds for a more leaner, more outcome focused, more leader supported operations efforts. Because I think what happened in many of these companies, the leaders just stopped paying attention to operations, but they took advantage of the upside. And then when things got bad, they just found a way to rationalize why it wasn't working. But in the current environment, people are paying a lot more attention. So I'm hearing a lot more situations where product operations teams are like, they've got the support of leadership for a couple key objectives. Their teams are smaller, but there's more sort of visibility and support around those efforts instead of trying to do anything and everything, which was setting people up to fail ultimately in that environment. So maybe there's a silver lining around this, which could benefit people.
Yeah, that's such a interesting way of looking at it, John. And I do think, yeah, you were saying, I think it does, maybe part of it is creating more thoughtful or intentional ways of thinking about product ops and how you optimize it and what you do with it. And kind of the theme for the season of the podcast is around making value visible, because off the back of this, if there's more, as you were just saying, there's more scrutiny and people are more interested in what the product ops teams are doing to see if there is actually impact and value. Something we want to share with the listeners and with the community is some really good examples of practical work that people in product ops have done that they feel have been valuable or have had an impact in their organizations. And we just want to talk through it with our guests and find out a bit about the context and maybe what it was that you did or you saw in your organization that had this impact, because that's what we want to try and do, is focus on doing impactful and valuable things within our business to stay there and grow the team and make sure that we're on the right track with what we're doing.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is just stepping back for a second. I chat with a lot of product operations folks, and there is this element of just repetition when it comes to the value that you're creating and what you're doing that I think really matters. One thing I've definitely observed chatting with different product ops leaders is there are people who've rehearsed their shtick and they've just dialed in. So for example, I'll be chatting on the phone with them and it's like, okay, we have 3 primary work streams. One's around the efficiency of teams. One is around up-leveling our teams. And then one is around our partnerships. The key problem with this is this. The key problem right now with this is this. And the key problem is theirs right now. This quarter, we're sort of allocating about 50% of our energy towards fixing that. This is this other one. This is this other one. The key outcomes we're expecting there are there and there are there and doing it. And it's funny when you're chatting with the folks who've rehearsed that you realize that a lot of it is about repetition. And I know that seems, the first bit of practical advice that I would give is that if you don't have a talk track that lands in 60 to 120 seconds, that paints a sort of strategic picture of what you're doing, and you're not testing it all the time and looking at people's eyes and seeing how it lands, if you're not a broken record, it can really put you at risk to do that. And that narrative does need to start. For the big theme for 2025 is around efficiency. And we're also the second company theme is around international. The third theme is like up-leveling our product practice. To doing that, those are our 3 work streams. Meanwhile, we always are doing support for releases. So that's like a hum, and then you kind of build up the story that way and you do it. So that's one thing, practical thing everyone can do, is that sort of one slider overview. And it's not just a slide. It needs to be something that you could just deliver whenever you need to. And that stretches beyond just the current quarter. It just stabilizes things. And it's a little bit of like, this sounds a little bit like optics and exec speak and navigating the politics of the organization, but it really is valuable to do that. It is valuable to get that and to test it with people and to watch to see if it aligns with what they're doing. So yeah, before getting into a specific example, I'm just noticing that macro theme of delivering that. As a secondary aspect to that, a practical bit of advice is you can't keep creating new words all the time for people to latch onto. And so you could probably socialize 5 ideas or 8 ideas at any time that will lodge in people's brains about what you're doing. So you got to pick those words, and you want them to be stable enough that after each and every quarter, your tactics may change and your allocation or proportion to those things might change. But the words remain, the themes remain. There's a little bit of story. There's definitely a storytelling, and it's not like we talked about before, like, oh, if everyone could agree on the word efficiency, would be good. No, it's just like you've got to test out those couple pillars and make sure they really land. So very specific example, maybe that word efficiency that I used prior to this is just too loosey-goosey, and you need to be more specific about what you're trying to do, but you're educating people in terms of the pillars of your work, and you're in the model making business. You're basically creating a mental model for the people you work with that they can use as a shortcut to understand your work. And so if you create the wrong model, or if you just like accept the leader's model carte blanche and you don't adapt it, you're lodging the wrong model in people's heads to do those. And so you have to be very deliberate about getting that model and making sure it sticks, and then using that as a framework for your story for quarters or maybe even years to come. You've picked the right model if you can be revisiting the same words over and over again. So maybe in one company, that would be one person says, well, it's efficiency, isn't it? And then you go out and you say, well, no, and actually, efficiency doesn't really inspire anyone. Like, what does efficiency mean? Maybe it's, okay, so we need to involve our customers in the framing to this, right? So it's really about friction. And then someone will say, well, what do you mean friction? Some types of friction are good friction. Like some, you want to collaborate, that's friction. And you're like, oh, okay. So friction's the wrong word. We're not just about removing friction. And then maybe the leader, this is just a specific example of someone who went through this in my head. They end up in this idea of like, we are all about removing the paper cuts and the low leverage busy work. So they picked like low leverage busy work, or it's all this type of stuff that's not adding value. That's just 50% of our time is just going to be pain killing. It's just going to be about freeing up your mind so you can focus on the things that matter. Maybe that's the pillar in that story. But once you've got that right, you can keep, and it lands with people, you can use that as the scaffold to hang your strategy and approach on over and over and over again. That one of the challenges I see is people just say, oh, the leader said this quarter, the priority is this. And okay, all right. So this is our priority, everyone, we're doing it. And then the next quarter, the leader says something different. There's nothing underpinning what you're doing, and that you can keep going and keep talking to it and talk passionately to it. So that's one tip that maybe people can take with them.
I mean, I was nodding along and like taking notes, but I'm in my 3rd role now with product operations. I did it at a startup, a scale up, and now I'm at a very large corporate style company. And in all of those, I've been almost like the first person or the person who's establishing it and leading it, the value of having a deck, I don't even go, like, I just say it's almost like you need to go on a roadshow and you have to have your deck with you, and it can be super simple. Maybe it's 1 slide or 2, or maybe you can condense it to 2 slides, but it has a few more. But just getting that right as a leader, I know that every conversation I go into with a stakeholder, usually when I start, it makes such a difference. And I learned that the hard way. And so now one of the first things I did was do that. And then also keep it kind of broad enough, but adapted to the company. So it's specific enough to the problems that they have. And those are kind of your pillars. And then it's sort of like, what are you aiming to do? And then the pieces of work we do and those objectives can always fit into, or are going to generally fit into those things. So that can change quarter on quarter, but those 2 or 3 things stay the same. And that, it's been so valuable to me. And I start every discussion with a stakeholder, even now, like a year in, I'm still pulling that out, an updated, slightly tweaked version.
And I think one point you bring up, which is great, is this is the scaffolding you hang the story over. You still need the story. And so I think what happens with some leaders is they come up with these names for these pillars, and before you know it, they've kind of lost the story to do these things. And so you could think about it as a little bit like the examples that you tell for there, or what you've observed out there. So take that friction thing, for example. Just in my career, would be these little funny phrases. And this is the second actionable thing. I know this sounds funny. We're talking about operations and talking about language, but maybe it is just information architecture in some sense. There were little problems that I would coin in meetings that had way more influence than other things that I would try to do that were smarter. So I'm in a meeting and I say, well, so we've been talking to the PMs, and here's an example. Here's a real world story of a PM. And here's the 20 forms that they had to fill out in a quarter. Got a form from enablement. We've got a form from the enterprise team. And the next part of the story is, and you can see here, it's drawing from the same information. This is what we call the 20 forms problem. Okay, then we go on with the meeting. 2 or 3 days later, they're like, so the 20 forms problem. And the next person's like, the 20 forms problem that we have. And it just sounds weird, but these things, these like turns of phrase can have a really big thing. So for anyone listening, playing around with language, and this is what you get when something really sticks, versus this is product market fit in some ways. It's internal product market fit. When you really feel the pull for the idea. And one of the big mistakes of my career is, this is the balance you're always going, is knowing the difference. There's things that you'll do that people will seem, the really nice people will be going along with, they'll be encouraging. They might say something is, oh, that's interesting. Oh, great. Okay, I'll get back to you on that. Or, okay, we're doing that. That's not product market fit. When you really feel it, you know it. So I'll give you an example. For someone named Jane, she's great. And I'd been trying to do some presentations alone, and it would sort of attract only the diehard change agents, the people who are like drinking all the Kool-Aid that I was putting out there, right? These were the people who really had some deep desire to shake things up or change, and they were all systems thinkers and whatever. And one time I was like, oh, let's do a talk with Jane. I'll do a talk with Jane, and we'll talk about something called enabling constraints, which was an idea. It's very easy to understand, but there's sort of it's really deep idea. It's this idea that some of the constraints we create are limiting and actually give us more headaches. And some of the constraints are enabling. They enable good things to happen. And a lot of management and leadership is about picking the right enabling constraints. Okay, I give the talk with Jane. She's obviously able to connect with people in a way that I wasn't able to connect with. She's obviously able to do that. After the particular call, 5 Slacks appear. Oh, could you come and do that with our group? Could you come and do it with this? Could you come and do it with that? So when you know it, when it's working, you'll really, really, really know it. And this is a big mistake. There are other things I've done both in product operations and other things where you're getting like this seemingly positive response, but it's not. When something's really working, you know it. Another example, we had talked about this before, but we were in a position where we needed to do some very rapid prioritization. I had done a workshop before, but I drew from some other ideas to be like, look, we don't have time to get completely into the weeds, but we don't want something that just confuses people. Like things like rice and other stuff like that often just, it doesn't land for me. And in many cases, it doesn't land for the people there. So I had to go hunting for the right frameworks or whatever. And I ended up with something very simple. My friend Josh Arnold had written about it, and I kind of reframed it into a workshop, which is more like qualitative costs of delay, which is you use value and urgency and effort. And it seems a little bit like the Eisenhower matrix, but there's some beauties to this model where it triggers the right discussions and it decouples urgency and value, which is one of the biggest things missing in a lot of prioritization frameworks. A lot of ones, they like, what's the reach? What's the whatever? But they don't discuss the impact of time on value. So the example I would give is, let's say you're in a company where you can tip local markets if you get above 50, 70% of the market. Does it make sense to try to get high land value in those markets, or to just get in with a lower land value? Lower. You want to tip that market. Later on, 3 years and 5 years from then, you can build up the average revenue per customer. but you don't want to make it hard for customers to buy. You don't want to do anything. So that's a case where there's an urgency profile to do certain things early. It's not that the other things aren't valuable. It's that there's a different impact of time on value for some of the efforts you're taking. Anyway, put that to the side for a second. That's a great example of, I did one for one group. Within an hour, they had taken, 15, 20 things, but the response afterwards tells all the story. That was so helpful. Oh, I started doing it with my teams. Could you do that with the leadership team? That was helpful. We really need to do it with this other group. It was helpful. And so that's, maybe the final example I have there of, with the macro theme here, that when it works, it works. And that's what you have to be paying attention to.
Yeah, I was actually going to double click a little bit about when it maybe doesn't work, because what I'm drawing from this conversation is product ops as a sociologist, product ops as a linguist, to be able to identify the things that are happening within the society of the organization, to be able to know that it is a thing that's worth pursuing. And then how do you name it? How do you define it? The 20 forms problem. It doesn't have to be fancy. It is what it is, the 20 forms problem. And then the society then within the organization brings that into their nomenclature. They start to talk about it, and that they've accepted it as a thing to work on.
Yeah.
Have there been times when it didn't quite work out for you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can think of so many. Well, one thing that you said there resonated with me, because I often talk about change is ultimately about people negotiating with their professional identity. It's internal negotiation and negotiation with other people. So you have to, unless it's some very violent top-down change, from the leaders to the front lines, it's people who have to frame a narrative that somehow negotiates their prior behavior to their new behavior. So I mentioned vibe leadership right now. That's all about narrative negotiation. That's all about figuring out a narrative that keeps the leader as the strong, innovative type, while rationalizing in their mind around why it was middle management. It was this. So that's internal negotiation that's going on with it. And so you have to think about, that's why you're sort of the seed planter for potential change narratives that people can wrap their professional identity around to do those things. And that's a great lesson about when it hasn't worked for me in the past, where often, and what I think about is it's easy this is why every ops person needs an accountability partner within the company to talk through some of the things they're seeing. Because if you were giving them advice, you would tell them, no, watch out from that. Right? Like, you can tell that's going to be a losing game. And the signals are typically something like, you have a small vocal minority of people who latch onto the idea and are very vocal and seek you out about it, but they seek it out in private. They're not willing to sort of publicly align around that thing. So that's like one thing. The second signal that you're getting into a bad place is, it's a lot of that's a good idea. That's curious. And especially from senior leaders, where you can tell that they're mulling over this thing where it's both threatening, but both potentially intriguing. So they'll reach out in the beginning and say, what do you think about that? Do you really think that? And then you're like, I guess they're asking me. That's great. I mean, the CEO is asking me these questions. I guess I'll just try to give them a measured response. But that's a signal. That's a signal when people are kind of reaching out with that kind of probing testing, is that there's a mix of intrigue, but they're not quite bought in. And this is sort of threatening. So that's like another sign. The third sign is that you just feel yourself getting emotionally invested in it. You feel like, this happens to me a lot, where the front line, I have like a protector complex. So it's like the front line will just be saying, do you know how hard it is to get work done in this place? It's like, we went 3 sprints and we've only been able to focus on things for 10% of the time. And you can feel your energy internally just being like, that's terrible. Like, what's going on there? And then you can just sense it, right? This is why you need an accountability partner. It's easy to sense it in retrospect, but not in the moment. And then you find yourself being like, you're in a meeting and you're just saying, for Christ's sakes, like, it's so hard to get work done right here. Little do you know that the middle managers and the VPs of those people are sitting in the room, and they have another audience in the room, and you're basically saying no one's getting anything done, and that thing is going to happen. So that's not going to go well, right? It's not going to go well, even if you're right. And in many cases, yeah, you're not making it up. You're right. Like, this is not what's going on. So that's how I'd answer your question, Kevin, is you need to be on the lookout for these traps, in a sense. Like, the other one is like the pet project trap. Like, well, you know what? I've been thinking about our managers, and they really need more product thinking. And you're like, oh, okay. So should we just create like a more formal learning track for them and product thinking? They're like, no, no, I'm not really sure I want to do that, but they really need some like more like product thinking. And then you say, well, should we create like a program around? No, don't do that. Could you just maybe just do some like small sessions with this, and this person? And you can just tell you're kind of getting pulled into an unofficial back channel track in that case. And I'll leave you with the final example. Often people are scrambling around. They're like, oh, for example, like a chief of staff is roaming around and they're like, I need help with this. I need help with annual planning. I need help with this. And your helping operations spirit is like, I'm here. Let's do it. And there's certain things, if you were to ask, like, has this ever gone right in the last 5 years? No. Have we ever succeeded at this? No. If you were a betting person, is there any chance that this is going to be successful in the current environment? No, it's never okay. You do some back channeling, VP is like, oh, I just phone in annual planning because we change our mind a month later, anytime, just give me my budget. I'm okay. I just fight for some budget. I look at the percentage in the spreadsheet, just ask for that percentage. And that's just it. That's how I play the game. Warning signs everywhere. If you were a betting person, it doesn't matter how good you're at operations, you're going to fail probably miserably at some kind of pursuit like that. So that's the other thing too, is like, you need to go down maybe we should write a post together called the warning signs. There's not nearly as much buy-in as you think for something you're doing, that you should not touch this with a 10-foot pole in operations. But yeah, hopefully that helps, Kevin.
That was awesome. Thank you so much.
I think that those were really helpful, I guess, nuggets of advice and examples, John, that covered so many different things. From starting off with having your narrative and your story, to obviously the signals that you look for and what is actually telling you that you are doing a good job. And I think while I've also done this before, where sometimes you focus so much on like the metrics. You need to have metrics, right? It's really good. But you almost like are over engineering what the metrics should be to tell you that something that you're doing in product ops is successful. One of the things I'll take away from this conversation is that, yes, you do need things you want to measure, but really like a true indication of success is something, it's hard to ignore. You'll know it when it's working. And so, yeah, I think sometimes we fixate on, oh no, how will we know if this is having an impact? But if it's really having an impact, you're going to know. Everybody's going to know.
Yeah, there's my friend Yaniv had this quote that I guess he got an email from this newsletter. And it says, emotions commit the crime, logic does the cover up.
I'm going to take that down.
So from that angle, like logic, I put the metrics, like metrics do the cover up, emotions commit the crime.
They don't lie.
Yeah, to do the things. So I think that's the interesting things too. I work at Amplitude. We think about measuring things all the time, and you need an array of metrics, and some of them are going to be more generic, but everyone buys into them. And some of them are going to be more bespoke for a problem that you have coming up. Yeah, measurement's a whole other discussion, but it is interesting when I hear someone say like, oh, but I'm having so much time proving the value of product ops in this thing. My go-to is not initially metrics and how to measure things. And the analogy that I would give there is, I remember there was someone from Slack who's like a leader at Slack, and he had this great line. He's like, if I knew the customer lifetime value of our customers, I'd be in a telephone company. And his point was basically like, the really interesting things have a nonlinear additive network effect. So ironically, some of the things that are hardest to measure are the most effective because they hit, so I'll do an exercise with teams and say, okay, there's 4 ways you can create value. You can increase revenue, you can protect revenue, you can decrease costs, you can protect costs. There's only 4 ways you can do it. The savvy person in that activity will say, but this product-led growth effort that we have is going to increase revenue. It's going to improve retention. It's going to lower the costs that we have, and it's going to protect costs. But I'm having trouble measuring it. If I was just increasing revenue, I would have a much easier time measuring it. This is all to say that building the narrative around the second and third order effects on a deep level, the conviction, is what's going to get you over the top of a kind of measurement aspect for this. Very clear example. You go into someone and you say, well, there's less friction in the release process. And how are you going to measure that? Well, we're going to maybe do a survey, or we're going to ask people about the busy work to release the item or something. And then someone's like, no, you don't, like, what would amazing releases look like? Like, think about all the things that it would speed up revenue. It would protect revenue from customers. It would decrease the costs about the things. It would protect costs from doing it. And so that's the difference between when someone's like floundering around for the perfect, I reduce friction metric. I always say, like, are you looking for the wrong thing first? Like, if you do believe this has an additive, multiplicative effect, a network effect, don't scrounge for the least multiplicative metric. Build the narrative around why you think that creates a flywheel effect, and then what signals you might have that flywheel is working the way that you're working. And a very actionable tip is you could be in a meeting and say, well, how do you measure the impact of that? And you could say, well, when it comes to first order effects, when it comes to the just thinking and use words like from a naive angle, from a naive metrics angle, this is just about reducing friction. You say, well, we could measure that like that. However, and then you jump to this little, like, an interesting flywheel diagram on the next slide. You think about it. If we could get this right, all the things that we could expect if this was working, it would be easier for engineers to onboard. It would be easier for these people to release. It would be, PMM would not have the attrition in hiring that it's having right now. It would lower burnout. It would do that stuff. And then you're like, well, we could try to measure some of these things, but I think there's more to this than just the naive measurement. Would we agree? And then people are like, yeah, maybe that's the start of how to introduce that narrative. So that's like one of the measurement traps people often fall into.
I'm stunned at the weight that you're giving product operations right now, like in terms of the weight that someone has to carry as a product operations person. And you mentioned the quote earlier, and one of the quotes that popped into my mind very early on in our discussion was from Bruce Lee, and how he said, I fear not the person that practices 10,000 different kicks once. I fear the person that practices one kick 10,000 times. And it's this,
Yeah.
and it goes back to the repetition that you mentioned earlier. So if I were taking so many notes, and there's so many different things that I took from this conversation, repetition being one of them, this need to be almost this empath, to be able to sense what the society is thinking and then be able to then name it and define it, to have sort of this healthy skepticism of metrics, to say, great, nice metrics, but let's double click a little bit further, and then be able to wrap everything into this compelling story and the conviction that you need to have, as you mentioned, so that people can tell those stories and rally around those stories. That's a lot. That's a lot for any one person.
It's a lot for people. Yeah.
Right. So I'm curious then, with all of that from just this one discussion, like, what do you think is the hardest thing about being in product operations?
I think it is this like lens shifting that you have to be doing a lot. It's context switching. And I think that that's true for a lot of roles in any company. It's doing that. I think that any role that sits at the overlaps of a bunch of different groups just has this heightened level of context switching that needs to happen. So for your own personal benefit, you need to unplug. You need to rest harder than other people if you're sitting in the thick of it. But the other thing is, I think you just need to be good. And it's something I've struggled with, frankly. I get excited about things. I forget which frame I'm in, all the time. And so I do think, though, it's kind of, right by my desk, having constant reminders, like, what hat am I wearing right now? all the different hats, right? And so that's an actionable thing that you have to do. Like, just I have to remind myself, like, what hat am I wearing at the moment to do those things? So that's the best I got there.
Oh my gosh. Jadishi and I have like so many sayings that we want to turn into stickers, and I think rest harder is going to be one that we want to turn into a sticker. That was fantastic.
I love that you got that up on like your wall there, by the way, John. I have lots of
And there's
post-its and
little
things
ones
around
too.
me.
It says
Yeah.
like librarian. Oh,
Yeah,
you know, like there's
yeah.
other ones I've added over time, which is, yeah.
That's
What
amazing.
hat are you wearing now?
Yeah, I'm gonna put that up just to be like, yeah, okay, what mode am I in at the moment?
Yeah.
I think it's also really hard once I feel this at the moment when you're in a leadership role in product ops, and now you're part of senior leadership too, because you're wearing that different hat at the table, you know, with
Yeah.
your counterparts, and yeah, you're constantly switching between these different things. So that's such.
I think I should get a clip on for the monitor to keep it up here, and then a little magnetic. You put the little magnets and you just put the little like slider. Yeah, this is almost
Exactly.
too far as of a reminder on these things. So
Yeah, that's great advice. I think our final question, I know we're coming to the end with you, John, is just you've been in like these 3 different types of product ops roles or viewpoints or perspectives that you've seen that you mentioned, and you've spoken to many, many, many people in product ops. I know this because I chatted to you also early in the year. I'm just interested to know whether your view of product ops has maybe changed from the first sort of interaction you had with it to now, having worked in different roles and spoken to all these people.
if anything, it's shifted a bit towards the idea of like product ops as platform product management, with a bit of service design thrown in and other things, where you just the appreciation for you're trying to build, like you are a platform in the org. You're in this kind of multi-sided marketplace where you've got these different folks. And that was my impression of it for a long time. But a little bit of this, you are creating this foundation that you're going to build off of over time. And so that's one of the main differences. The overlaps with platform product management and other things is what comes out for me.
Awesome. Any last thoughts from your side, Kevin?
I'm all good. Thank you so much. This is so much fun, John.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, this is great.
Yeah.
And yeah, looking forward to this coming out. There we go.
Definitely. It was really great chatting to you, John. I'm super excited to have you on, and you've left us with so much to think about. So Kevin and me love to talk about things and go through all our different ideas, and I think we've gotten so much from this conversation.
My pleasure.
I think that people do know how to contact you, but if there's, I assume if they want, they can reach out on LinkedIn. But is there anything else you want to just let them know about, or they should check out?
The newsletter. I mean, the newsletter's gotten a little rangy at the moment. We're in like 360 posts of the recent one, so one a week for the last 5-6 years, and then before that, I had a bunch of other posts. So it might be a little bit hard to find out where to start. I'm kind of working on that. Start from the middle or the end, or maybe I should do a little readers, and maybe we'll take that as an action item. We'll put like 5 of the good starting posts if you're into product operations, curated by me, and then we'll do that later. So instead of just landing them on the newsletter, at which point they'll be like, what's he talking about this week? Yeah, we can try it that way.
That sounds great. Like a curated thing for product ops to go to. I'd love that. And I'm sure so would our listeners. So yeah, thank you very much, John, and enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. All right. Bye, Kevin. Bye.
Bye. If you've enjoyed this episode, please remember to rate, follow, and subscribe to Product Ops Podcast across our channels, including Substack. Even better, share it with your friends and colleagues in Product Ops, as that helps others find it. Thanks, and take care.